But we begin, as we often do, with the big story. Friday saw the official public introduction of incoming Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, who has now officially started his tenure. Shortly after hosting a formal press conference, Petitti sat down for this exclusive and all-encompassing interview with our Dave Revson.
Well, thrilled to have the new commissioner of the Big Ten, Tony Petitti, with me. Tony, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
What has this last couple of weeks been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. You understand that it's a big job and it's a public job, and as you're going through the process, you realize that, and I've worked with commissioners throughout my career, but then from that moment of being announced, you realize it's a little bit different than I expected. And I've worked in some big places, but this is sort of another level. And the other thing that's been great about it is hearing from so many different people I work with in college athletics over the years, like some of them going way back, including Commissioner Kramer from the SEC and Jim Delaney and others. And hearing that reach back out has been great, reconnecting with a lot of really good friends.
You said it's been a little bit different than you expected. In what ways is it different?
Just the attention to it in terms of just the news coverage and all the aspects, and hearing from people and seeing reaction across. And it was also great. I mean, I've heard from a lot of the coaches in the Big Ten across multiple sports, just reaching out, offering help and support. So that's been really reassuring.
What made this job attractive for you?
I think just the scope. I mean, it's a combination, and without saying the cliches, that I love college sports, because clearly I do. But I think it's also the fact that what the Big Ten represents, and I've been really fortunate to work in places that really inspire people and bring them together, and the Big Ten is exactly that. And I think I like challenges where there's great tradition, but there's needed change and innovation. I think that combination here is what the conference needs and what the college athletics needs right now that's going on. And the last piece, like for me personally, I've made fun of a lot of this, but I'm not an elite college athlete, Division III baseball player. The good thing there wasn't Division IV. I probably should have played that. But in any event, I was able to do that, and I understand that value because it's such a big part of the opportunity that I got. And thanks to my parents who were not college educated but understood the importance. So that means a lot. So when you put a lot together into one big pot, it's like, yeah, this is a great job.
You mentioned being a Division III baseball player playing at Haverford. What are your best memories of that experience?
I think I'm the only catcher in baseball history to be behind the plate when the first 4 hitters in the lineup on 5 pitches hit for the cycle. So Think about that.
All right. Did the pitcher blame you for the pitches?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I was probably putting down the same finger every time. I'm not sure it would have mattered. And amazingly, I think J.P. Ricciardi, who became a general manager of baseball, was one of the guys that was in that game. So that's one. And then, my first career home run, I'm running around the bases thinking it's going to be the usual, leg out a double if I'm lucky. And as I go around the first base bag, the umpire says, "Son, you can slow down. It's over the fence." So that's about it. That probably sums up my career.
All right. But that memory obviously has stuck with you as something that was a real positive experience. And, I think sometimes in all of the business of college sports, the student athlete part of it maybe gets lost just a little bit.
I mean, I miss it. The only thing when I talk to my own kids and friends, and some of them who played, college sports, and then obviously in some of the jobs I've been around professional athletes who then had to give up their careers as well, or it's you really miss it. It's the one thing that I always think about a lot that I wish I was still doing in some way. Being on a team is great. Being a student athlete is an incredible experience, and whether you're taking Division III long bus ride to play a game and come back or not, and with not a lot of people watching, it still felt great to me. And I really, you're exactly right. It's a great experience. And
it's interesting. We obviously, in the time we've been on the air with the network, have had 2 different commissioners, and both did the job incredibly well, but they approached it in really different ways. What do you see as the role of a conference commissioner?
I think in this point, I think number one is you have to make sure that you understand the mission of these universities. So I think that became very clear in the process to get the position. So I think that's part of it. I think the reaching out and working with athletic directors and SWAs while you're trying to do one thing, which is always make it better for student athletes. I think the most important thing is, these student athletes connect, other students on campus. They connect alums. They connect faculty. They connect people that live in the state that just really care because they live and work in the states where these universities are. So it's just an incredible thing that's happening across so many different sports. So I think that's just sort of the guiding principle of what you're always thinking about, you're trying to accomplish. And if that means you have to change certain things and it might look different than it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that's all fine, as long as that same core thing just keeps going, because that's the best part of it.
Well, I do think it's pretty evident that things are very different, right? And that we are in this time where I would say we've seen more change in the last 5 years than maybe in the last 50. I mean, it'd be hard to quantify exactly, but the landscape is changing so dramatically. As you step back and try to, from the perspective of someone coming in from the outside of college athletics, someone who's certainly very familiar with college athletics but haven't worked intimately in it here recently, what do you see as kind of the landscape of this world right now that you're entering?
Yeah, it feels like a lot of sort of unmanaged change, which is difficult for organizations to deal with when there's outside factors happening, right? So that's, managed change is easier, but you have to recognize that you do need to do things differently. And so some of that environment should be informing decisions that are getting made to make things better and different. So, but the takeaway I've had in the process, and then being with the other commissioners, I've had calls with with a bunch of them, and getting to see them in Dallas the last few days, is that we've got to do it all together. This is all one big national system, right? The Big Ten is in multiple states. All conferences are in multiple states. We compete nationally. It doesn't seem to make sense to me to have a system around a lot of these topics where it's not one system that everybody can play by what the rules are. And that doesn't mean that student athletes won't have more benefits going forward. It's just the question of what is that going to look like? How do we have transparency? What does it mean? And what does it mean to level the playing field? You want it to be fair. You don't want to lose the competitive balance that exists in all these sports. You want to maintain all of that. And so the only way we're going to do that is by working together, conferences, NCAA, and legislative support to cover the way some of these issues are flying around right now.
Is that something in terms of, because you mentioned in your press conference too, kind of, hey, there ought to be some federal rules around that. Mm-hmm. Is that something you feel like is being actively pursued right now? Like how do the conference commissioners kind of get the government to?
I mean, again, just like very, very briefly exposed and obviously recently, but just seeing what President Baker's been doing at the NCAA and his, what his skill set is and what he's been able to accomplish in his career and leading those efforts. I've seen that as a point of emphasis. I think there's not, I don't think you would, that people would be surprised that we all need to do this together. So I think he's doing that, and he's kind of leading those efforts. And, I think conferences will have to contribute understanding, so he understands what's important. And we have to have, sort of a sense of what our consensus is as a conference, and then arm him with the right, process and thinking to go get done what we need to get done.
How do you feel about where we are in NIL right now?
I think it's pretty much what I just said. I think it needs, a transparent system. I think it feels to me that it's becoming something different than what it was intended to be. And
how so?
So I think you're seeing that potentially it's having influence, on attendance and other things, transfers. I think that's not necessarily what it was intended to do. I think student athletes should absolutely have the right to monetize their name, image, and likeness rights, but we need to understand what that really is, making it transparent, making it safe for student athletes to be in that environment, but also giving them the opportunity to maximize that value. They should have that right. I totally agree with that. But it's just a question of how do we prevent it from maybe trickling to something that it's not really what it was intended to do that could really impact a lot of other things on campuses.
Focusing on the particulars of the Big Ten, the media rights deal is obviously done, in terms of the overarching structure of it, but I know that there's a lot of detail that still needs to be ironed out here. How much do you feel like your background in media will help you in terms of navigating this?
Yeah, I've been down this road before where you shake hands and say you have a deal, and then you have to get the long form contracts done. I've seen that happen multiple times. And I think it doesn't happen as fast as people generally think it does, especially when you have multiple partners. But look, the great news is Fox, CBS, NBC, really terrific partners for the conference, and a lot of opportunity in the way and the resources they're going to put into Big Ten games and content. And so that's tremendous. But when you integrate, there's some work to be done to integrate, going from basically Fox and then ESPN to NBC and CBS. It's just different. So there's a little bit of growing that has to happen, but I feel pretty comfortable that we have the right people to get that done.
So that's a huge task, and that's immediately on your plate. The other enormous task, of course, is the integration of USC and UCLA, and you were talking about that as well a little bit in the news conference. Can you kind of give us a sense, and again, I know you're really early on in dealing with this, but just kind of where it is right now and what you think kind of is this path here over the next year?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just an assessment of making sure that staff feels like that they're being given enough resources to really execute it properly, and making sure that we're putting the time and the effort. So I know we have really good people working on it hard every day, and I want to make sure that as the leader of the conference, I'm giving them the resources they need to do it. And so I need to really get into the details of that. So making sure that we are providing the right support, and then getting on campus and working with Martin and Mike at UCLA and USC to make sure that they feel the same thing and get their assessment of what they think they need. It's new for them, right, doing this, and we got to do it right. Look, the conference has a great history of doing this and doing it really well in a thoughtful manner. And then I think the last part of it is just connecting the markets together, there's a lot of Big Ten alums, as you guys know, in Los Angeles, that now this network is going to have great reach and be a part of that community, so that's terrific. But connecting events and making sure that's cohesive so that we can, it will take time, but everything we can do to accelerate the process so that in a few years, a UCLA Purdue game feels like a Big Ten conference game.
Tony Petitti has officially begun a new era as the 7th commissioner in Big Ten Conference history started his job in earnest on Monday. Here's part 2 of Dave Revson's interview with Petitti, which took place just after his formal public introduction this past Friday.
How do you think that your background in MLB in particular will inform you on some of these issues we've talked about, from NIL, right, which kind of straddles this professional model, which obviously you dealt with a fully professional model there, and then of course understanding network television and how that might factor into expansion. Like how do you see kind of the path that you've been on? Maybe not necessarily just MLB, but that's the one that kind of jumped out at me as maybe having some tentacles in all of these worlds.
I think despite all the media background, I obviously working in a league office was helped me get this position, like the understanding and explaining what I did there, I think was important in the whole process. And what I'll say about that is there's a lot of similarities I believe, between being in a league office and being in a commissioner's office. And what I mean by that is, at MLB it was 30 owners, 30 team presidents, 30 baseball operations departments, ticketing department, everything was multiplied, right? Now, again, only one sport, but multiple stakeholders across each organization. And in the commissioner's office, your job is to interact with all of them and make sure that you're providing the resources that everybody needs to compete properly, to grow their businesses locally, to grow the game nationally, all of those things. And I had a lot of different departments at MLB beyond media. I had international, I had special events, I had the postseason, I had obviously the All-Star game, some of the things we did at Field of Dreams and Fort Bragg and London. So I learned, and marketing and branding. So I learned all of that, and it's always under the guise of you're doing it for the whole group, all 30 teams. I think that's the same thing in the conference office. We're doing it for the 14, soon to be 16 members. The biggest difference is multiple sports, right? And so you have to, understand that it's not only 16 times, more. So we have 28 championships, 14 men and women. So we got to be able to do that. So, but I think that experience is very relevant in terms of how you communicate, how you work, how you collaborate. I think that's great training. There'll be some things that will be different. But I kind of come to it more from process than sort of saying like, here's the result I'm looking for.
What excites you the most about these schools that you're going to be working with in this conference as a whole?
And I said it this morning, like going to the Rose Bowl in 1988, I was sitting like at the top. I don't even remember how we got the tickets. We're up there just hacking around. I thought maybe the only time I ever go to a Rose Bowl. Then a year later, I'm back working in a place and interacting with these incredible people at ABC Sports. And so, I love. There's still something really exciting about being at events and being at games. I really love being at the Women's Golf Championships at Fox Chapel in Pittsburgh. It was just fun to walk around now, see their families following them and the incredible play. So I think that part of just being back in these, and then when you talk about some of the size of the audiences that this conference can drive, the huge amounts of alumni and big student bases, these are really big things that mean a ton. And so I'm excited about all of that, like just being a part of that and knowing that you can impact it is just such a really great opportunity and feels pretty cool, I have to say.
I know you've already had the chance to dive in. You were at the CFP meetings. You, as has been discussed here in the period since you were announced as the commissioner, had a big role in the formation of the BCS. So Give us a little bit of a sense here of kind of the pathway from kind of the beginning of the BCS to where we are now, and how you feel about the college football playoff structure that's now in place.
Yeah, look, I remember doing this when we were creating the BCS. I always thought that within a few years it was going to be a playoff system, because it just felt like it would make it so obvious that once you had just one game featuring 1-2, that would be very difficult to figure out who should play in that game, which has proved to be, and that was where all the controversy was in the BCS. But having said that, BCS gave college football USC, Texas. It gave college football Miami, Ohio State. So there were those matchups that happened over the years that would not have been played absent it. But it clearly was intended to be something to evolve, which is exactly what happened. How long it took or not is a whole other issue. And I think that's this next phase now. You started with a certain playoff. You understand that it's hard to whittle down to 4 teams, and going to 12 makes a lot more sense. And the other thing about it is just a great sporting event. People are going to love this. If you go back on, you can do this, and you look back at 4 seasons ago and just look at who these 12, teams would be. It's pretty spectacular when you start seeing the matchups, and that gets you really excited. And so I think it's just going to be a really, a great sporting event. And I think the key thing about it is, and I said this in the room, I really mean this, a great postseason makes the regular season better. They're really connected. You want your regular season to matter. And I think that's just something where 12 seems like a really great number to preserve these do-or-die matchups late in November that we all have gotten used to watching. We want that to continue. And the stakes should be high every week. That's been the great thing about college football for the last few years, whether it was the BCS where they were super high, right? One loss, you might have been eliminated. And then this 4-team configuration where, the same thing, like losing a game or 2 is really difficult to overcome. Now it will be a little bit easier, but at the same time, it's still going to be very competitive. So I think that's the thing I'm excited about. That this seems like a format that's going to do both better postseason and great regular season.
And of course, the goal for the Big Ten is to come away with championships. I'm going to leave you with this. You're going to be asked this question a lot, because I'm asked this question a lot. How does the Big Ten get to a point where it's winning more of these championships, where they're crowning a national champ in basketball, in football, in women's basketball, whatever it might be? Kind of the most watched events, it seems like the Big Ten hasn't had a whole lot of success.
Yeah, although I'm sure, like you guys felt, 2 of the 4 in the playoff last year was pretty impressive.
I liked our chances.
Yeah, it was pretty good, right? Would have liked a different outcome, but
yes.
2 out of 4 was good. And women's this run in the women's tournament with Iowa was spectacular, and it generated a lot of interest. So I think they're always in the mix, and so I think part of it is making sure that at the conference office we're providing the right resources. I think, for me, a part of the education and the job is talking and meeting with coaches and building those relationships so I can understand what's happening. But look, they're tremendous resources. These schools are going to be a big part of the college football postseason. They're always going to be a big part of the NCAA men's tournament, and always be a big part of the women's. And there are lots of other sports that as a conference dominate. I was watching the wrestling national championships, back early. I guess it was about a month or so ago, 2 months ago. It was, which is a great event. I love watching it, and the dominance there is pretty obvious,
yes,
as you guys know.
Yes. Well, Tony Petitti, congratulations. Thrilled to have you in the Big Ten, and look forward to collaborating with you here in the years to come.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
It is time for today's big stat, fueled by Gatorade. Purdue had 5 players taken in the 2023 draft, the biggest Boilermaker presence in nearly 2 decades. Last year's top receiver QB combo went in the 4th round. Charlie Jones and Aiden O'Connell selected by Cincinnati and Las Vegas, respectively. Tight end Payne Durham went in round 5. Corey Trice and Jalen Graham were 7th round picks. And as those Boilermakers move on, someone new moves in to the corner office, and that is first-year head man Ryan Walters, who's kind enough to join us for today's big interview. Hey, Ryan, great to see you. I'm curious, from a 40,000-foot perspective, as my friends like to say, how do you assess spring ball in your first spring with a new staff and a new collection of guys?
Yeah, first off, great to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on. Spring was awesome. It was a dream come true to, as a first-time head coach, to be able to go through a spring and put a staff together and get to know the locker room and get to really evaluate what we have on the roster was huge. We categorize success this spring by daily improvement and getting better every day, and how you sort of categorize that is just by not making the same mistakes day 1 to day 2 to day 2 to day 3, and I felt like we did that and didn't waste any practices.
Ryan, I know in speaking with Brett Bielema a year ago, he knew that you would be a head coach. You said throughout your career, you were preparing yourself for the opportunity to be a head coach. How has the reality compared to the dream?
It's been awesome. You know, like you said, I've known for a long time. I was one of those guys that knew what they wanted to do when they grew up at a young age, and really give credit to Dan Hawkins for giving me that first student assistant job, and you know, sitting in that staff meeting for the first time and seeing him conduct the staff meeting. I knew this is what I wanted to do, and so it's been fun to kind of go through my career and strategically and you know, intentionally catalog and take in information from various programs I've been at in order to be where I'm at today and just execute a plan. And so that's been calming for my first go round, and to execute that plan and see it play out real time and actually work out better than I had previously thought has been very. I've been very grateful for that.
As a coach who has had so much success on the defensive side of the ball, obviously the first question that a lot of Purdue fans had, what will we do offensively? Because it is a program that has historically been known for offense. So you bring in Graham Harrell. Why was he the right guy as OC?
You know, the old adage, you know, to me, the quarterback position is the most important position in sports, period. And as a defensive guy, I knew I had to hire an offensive coordinator that thought about the game the way I do, but that could also attract offensive skill positions and quarterbacks. And so hiring Graham was a no-brainer. He's gotten rave reviews from guys that I really trust on the offensive side of the ball in his profession. And, you know, to see what he did at USC under his time there was phenomenal. And, you know, it's been a great marriage. And he's doing the things that I don't like seeing as a defensive coordinator on Saturdays. And, you know, we were able to attract Hudson Card as a result of that hire. And it's been very, very good transition so far.
Speaking of good transitions, that's a professional television segue because Hudson Card was the guy I was going to ask you about next. You described him after a couple of spring practices as, quote, better than advertised. What do you mean by that?
You know, I knew he was good. Obviously, when we got here and Aiden O'Connell was leaving, I knew we had to get an experienced quarterback. And so we evaluated all the QBs in the transfer portal and thought he was the best one, and just, you know, swung for the fences and were able to land him. But, you know, some of the things that they were asking him to do at Texas, you couldn't really see, you know, how good he was in the drop back game, how good he was in the quick game, how quick he could get the ball out, and really work the route tree. So when we got him, and, you know, the way the ball spins off his hand and really pops, and how accurate he is, and then we put pads on and to see him take off, you know, I think that is an area of his game that is undervalued and underrated. So I haven't been around a guy that has that type of elite arm talent with the ability to extend and really stretch the field with his legs. So I'm really happy with the way he's put his head down and gone to work and earned the respect of his teammates, the way he's progressed in terms of understanding what we're trying to do schematically on offense.
Obviously a guy who is the front runner to replace Aiden O'Connell, but you also have to replace one of not just the Big Ten's, one of the nation's top receivers a year ago in Charlie Jones. We saw he was drafted in the 4th round. I know you mentioned Deion Burks on at least one occasion this spring. You have a couple of veterans out there who perhaps need to step up. How do you feel about that room, and who are the guys that are going to have to produce this year more than they have in the past?
Yeah, I feel really good about that room. Those guys are experienced. They're you know, big-time playmakers. Obviously, they're used to throwing the ball around a lot here, so they've got great ball skills. You know, watching just them run routes on air and go through the route tree is fun to watch. You talk about Deion Burks, you talk about T.J. Sheffield, Mershawn Rice, Elijah Canyon, and numerous others with a couple guys that we're also bringing in. Feel good about the weapons around Hud, and Graham's going to have a fun time, you know, with this offense, especially with what he does.
Obviously, the run game is always going to be a part of every offense inside the Big Ten, and Devin Mockabee ran for nearly 1,000 yards a year ago, averaged about 5 per carry. How do you see the run game kind of fitting into this scheme, and who else could emerge from that particular room?
Yeah, to go back, I forgot to mention Abdur. He'd kill me if I didn't mention Abdur in the throw game. He's also a guy that we're counting on. But in the running back room, obviously Mockabee did a great job a year ago. which is why the first order of business was to put him on scholarship as a head coach. He deserves it, and he's proven to really being able to run the football in this league. Another guy that we switched from really slot receiver to tailback is Tyrone Tracy, who got better every day in the springtime, and I'm looking forward to getting him touches and creating matchup issues out of the backfield. And he's also progressed as a run blocker or a pass protection running back. And then Dylan Downing, another guy that was a walk-on, who really does a good job of running in between the tackles and getting downhill and getting those tough and dirty yards. I feel good about that room and where we're at.
You know, Ryan, when first-year head coaches take over, they often say the biggest issue for them in spring ball is assessing the offensive line, because up front you have so many issues with injuries suffered the past season and guys recovering. You have turnover. You have questions about the depth and where can guys play. How were you able to assess your offensive line throughout the spring?
Yeah, you're right. That was an area of concern, just because, like you said, we did have a lot of guys that weren't able to go through spring. Had some turnover in the transfer portal that we're also bringing in and adding players from the transfer portal that are experienced guys. So it's still ever evolving. I do feel good and confident about where we'll get to by the time fall camp rolls around. But it is an ongoing process.
Ryan, you went through the process that so many coaches do. You start as a grad assistant, you work your way up to position coach in DC, and then eventually you get the chance to be a head coach. And often those head coaches then bring their former position coaches when they were DCs to be their assistants and their DCs. And that's exactly what you've done, bringing Kevin Kane with you, who coached outside linebackers last year at Illinois. So folks will get to know him a little bit better as a primary assistant. What's his strength?
You know, he's obviously done it before, which was attractive to me and was evident working with him the past 2 years. So from that standpoint, he's got experience and did it at a high level. And just his understanding of how the front correlates with the back and how they work together and not putting them in compromise. He was one of the guys I talked to the most on game days the last 2 years, just in terms of adjustments in game and seeing what the offense was, how they were trying to attack us. So was very pleased with being able to attract him here, and I'm grateful that he's here. He allows me to do my job as a head coach more productively, more efficiently. So I'm fired up that he's here. He knows the defense inside and out, and as do the rest of the guys. It was important because our style of play is so different from a schematic standpoint to hire guys that I've either worked with in the past when we first started this scheme or worked with me at Illinois the last 2 seasons to be able to, teach and know the ins and outs of what we're trying to do schematically.
Hey, speaking of outside backers, Nick Carraway got a lot of run last year as a young guy and has gotten a lot of praise and ink after what he did this spring. And obviously he's turning some heads. What makes him special? What kind of impact does he have to have on your defense?
Yeah, I mean, if he plays like he did this spring, watch out. You talk about a guy that's versatile, that knows the ins and outs of the games, understands leverage, understands angles, is explosive, trying to get to the quarterback, and has a multitude of moves, and is also very fluid and disciplined when he drops into coverage. Now, I'm gonna be on Kane a lot if he drops him too many times, because I love the way he gets after the quarterback, but. He's a guy that I'm counting on to play some significant minutes and be an impact player for us. And the sky's the limit for him in his future. I'm really, really pleased that he's here.
Ryan, it's intriguing because you did bring up the transfer portal, and every team has to deal with losses to the transfer portal, but also guys you are going to get from the portal and try to integrate into your team. Some of the coaches that have been around a long time seem to be having some issues with this because it is outside their comfort zone in a weird sort of way as a younger 37-year-old first-year head coach. Does it come maybe a little bit more naturally or a little bit easier for you?
Yeah, I think so. If you equate it to just like a company, right? If you got somebody that's worked for 20 years and all of a sudden policy changes, they're going to have a hard time adapting to or wanting to change. Whereas if that same company hires somebody when policy has already changed, it's easy for them to adapt and to thrive. And so I don't look at the transfer portal as an issue or a challenge. It's more of an opportunity. And I think it definitely helps that I'm coming in on the front end of it. Where it's already in place and you're just having to adapt to and adjust with the ever-changing landscape of college football. and use it to your favor.
All right, lastly, Ryan, I know you'll be rooting against your former team, Illinois, in at least one game this year, but at least one. But you saw a bunch of the guys who you got really close to over the last couple of years hear their names called during the draft. Devin Witherspoon going top 5, Quan Martin, Sidney Brown all get drafted. What did that moment feel like for you to hear those guys selected so high in the NFL draft?
It wasn't surprising. Those guys, what you saw on Saturdays is what we saw every day in practice. I thought Aaron Henry did a great job with Devin Witherspoon, just getting them prepared week in and week out. And then, Quan and Sidney were a joy to have in my meeting rooms, and just the way they studied film, the way they listened. Those two are the most coachable kids I've been around. And so to hear their name get called and their dreams come true, was heartwarming. I don't know how else to describe it. Not surprised, but very, very proud of the work that they put in, and I'm excited for their future, and looking forward to rooting for some different NFL teams.
And I know they are appreciative of everything that you did for them over the last 2 years in Champaign as well. Ryan Walters, first-year Purdue head coach. Now a little bit of a break, even though there's no such actual thing as a break for college football coaches these days before the start of the 2023 season. Hey, Ryan, we really appreciate the time. Best of luck. Look forward to watching you on the journey with the Boilermakers this season and beyond.
Thank you so much. Again, thanks for having me, and we'll be in touch.